When you think of American expansionism, you're probably picturing something from a history book, right? Like 19th century manifest destiny kind of stuff. But what if that chapter isn't really closed? We've seen some recent proposals under the Trump administration that have dragged this idea kicking and screaming right back into the modern day headlines. And it's making us question everything we thought we knew about borders and nations. So let's just get right to it. Could the United States actually add a 51st state by force? Now, this isn't some plot from a political thriller. It's a very real question that's been debated at the highest levels of government. Could the U.S. really, in this day and age, expand its territory through coercion? That's the big question we're going to dig into. Okay, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll take a look at what the American public actually thinks about all this. Then, we're diving into two really fascinating case studies, the whole situation with Greenland and the controversy over the Panama Canal. After that, we'll get into the backlash, because believe me, there was a lot of it, both here and around the world. And finally, we'll zoom out and talk about what this means for the idea of sovereignty itself. Right, so before we get into the nitty-gritty of Greenland or Panama, let's just take the temperature in the room. What do the American people actually think? Is there a genuine desire for a bigger America? Or are these ideas just totally out of step with what folks want? Well, this YouGov poll from early 2025 paints a pretty clear picture. Almost half the country, 48%, is just flat out against expansion, period. Now, about a third are maybe open to the idea, but only if it's peaceful. And get this, only 4%, just 4%, are on board if it requires military force. That's a tiny number, and it's a really important piece of context for the political drama that's about to unfold. All right, let's dive into our first big example, Greenland. In late 2024, the idea of the U.S. acquiring Greenland came back in a big way. But this time, it wasn't some quirky real estate deal. No, this time it was framed as something vital, something essential for national security. I mean, listen to that language, an absolute necessity. That's incredibly strong stuff. This wasn't just floating an idea. It was a serious declaration of strategic interest, and it immediately sent a signal to everyone, at home and abroad, that this was not a joke. And wow, did things move fast after that. It goes from a necessity in December to a high-profile visit from Donald Trump Jr. just a few weeks later. The very next day, Trump refuses to rule out using military force. And the response from Denmark? It was immediate. By the middle of January, their top CEOs are in a crisis meeting with the government. You can just feel the tension ratcheting up. But back here in the States, the public was not convinced. This USA Today poll shows a clear majority. 53% didn't support the idea at all, and only a tiny sliver, just 11%, thought the U.S. should actually go through with buying or annexing the island. So you've got this massive disconnect, right? The administration is pushing hard, but the American people, yeah, not so much. So what's the deal with Greenland? Why all the intense focus? Well, it really boils down to four huge strategic assets. First, it's sitting on vast deposits of rare earth elements, the stuff that's absolutely crucial for our phones, computers, and defense tech. Second, it's home to Protufik space base, which is critical for our missile warning systems. Third, it's prime real estate for future Arctic shipping routes. And fourth, that massive ice sheet holds about 20% of all the fresh water on the planet. The strategic value is just immense. Okay, now let's head south for our second case study, the Panama Canal. Now, this one's a little different. It's not about acquiring brand new territory. It's about reclaiming control over a critical waterway. And this set up a major clash between U.S. security interests and a deep sense of Panamanian national pride. So from the U.S. perspective, the rationale was about things like excessive rates and, maybe more importantly, concerns about Chinese influence over the canal's ports. But for Panama, this wasn't just about business or geopolitics. I mean, the canal is a huge symbol of their independence. It's woven into their national identity. So for them, these moves by the U.S. felt like a direct threat to their very sovereignty. And just like with Greenland, you see this pattern of pressure just building and building. It starts with a demand in December. Then, by March, the Pentagon is literally drawing up credible military options. In early April, the idea of reviving old U.S. military bases gets floated. And just one day later, it all culminates in a joint security deal that allows American troops back on Panamanian soil. The speed of that escalation is pretty breathtaking. So, how did the Panamanian people feel about all this? Well, this poll from April 2025 says it all. I mean, look at that number. 81% believed their own authority should run the canal. Only 16% wanted the U.S. government in charge. That is overwhelming. It's not even close. The public was absolutely united on this. This quote from opposition leader Ricardo Lombana, I think it just perfectly sums up how people there felt. He called the security deal an invasion without firing a shot. That phrase just hit a nerve. It perfectly captured this feeling that their sovereignty was being violated, not through partnership, but through pressure. So, as you can imagine, all of this talk about expansion and military pressure didn't exactly happen in a vacuum. The reaction was, well, it was swift, and it came from all over, sending shockwaves through the international community and kicking off a major political battle right here at home. You might expect some carefully chosen diplomatic language from a close ally like Canada. But this was blunt. The Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, just came right out and said Trump has territorial views and that it was never, ever going to happen. It was a crystal clear message from the key neighbor. And that concern just rippled across the Atlantic. French President Emmanuel Macron called it the law of the strongest. And his words really get at this wider fear among allies, that the very rules of the game were being changed. People were starting to wonder if the fundamental stability of the post-war world was at risk. And the pushback wasn't just coming from other countries. Here at home, Congress stepped in. You had a bipartisan group introduce the No Invading Allies Act. The goal was simple: to prevent any federal money from being used to invade these places without an explicit green light from Congress. It was a direct check on executive power. Okay, so let's zoom out. What's the big takeaway here? Beyond the specific headlines about Greenland and Panama, these events are forcing us to ask a much, much bigger question. Are the basic rules that have kept the world in order for more than 75 years suddenly up for grabs? For a long, long time, there's been this basic understanding in the world. You don't just go and take another country's land by force. It's been a cornerstone of global stability since the end of World War II. But as analysis from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs points out, just threatening to do it is enough to shake that foundation, to unsettle that norm, and bring back a kind of power politics that many of us thought was ancient history. And that brings us to a really powerful counter-argument from security experts. Jennifer Spence from the Belfer Center puts it perfectly. Making the U.S. safer doesn't come from dominating your neighbors. Real lasting security isn't achieved through aggression, especially against your allies. In the end, that kind of action actually makes you less safe, not more. So that's where all of this leaves us. We're left with this huge, unsettling question. After decades of relative stability, are we heading into a new era where borders are negotiable again? Is that fundamental rule against taking territory by force, the very rule that has defined our world since the last Great War, is it now a thing of the past? The answer to that question is going to shape the world for a long, long time to come.